I would like to present about the relevance of international migration in Kyrgyzstan, about the labor migration as a livelihood strategy, about the economic impact of international migration, and about the impact of the integration to the Eurasian Economic Union to the labor migration. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union and during the transformation period, Kyrgyzstan faced several challenges, especially social economic challenges. So as you can see from this diagram, these challenges were like as job cuts and increase of unemployment, low salary, pensions and allowances, increase in the level of poverty, decline of living standards, and also decrease in the state support or insufficient state support, socioeconomic uncertainty in the country, and insecurity. All these challenges have led to adaptation of additional livelihood strategies, and one of additional livelihood strategies has become international labor migration. When we look at the scale of the labor migration, we can see that more than 700,000 of Kyrgyz citizens work abroad, and 90% of these migrants work in Russian Federation. Also, the main destinations are Kazakhstan, Turkey, South Korea. I should mention that over the last 10 years, they increased the number of migrants to Turkey and South Korea. Also, around 20,000 Kyrgyz citizens work in Europe, in USA, in some in Gulf states, and in other some countries. It should be mentioned that the key determinant of geographical destination is a functioning network, like as kinship or like as country fellowship, friendship, shared community. In order to investigate the international labor migration, they will use several research methods, like as qualitative and quantitative research methods. For example, conducting focus group discussions among female and male community members, also conducting a questionnaire survey in migrant households, mainly in the rural areas, and conducting interviews in the place of destination, for example, here in conducting interviews in Moscow with the migrant, and also interviewing the representatives of this state migration service. My case study is in southern Kyrgyzstan. So it's Jalabad province, and within the Jalabad province, the Bazar-Korgon district, with the red line. So it should be mentioned that the majority of migrants, especially international labor migrants, are from southern Kyrgyzstan. And southern Kyrgyzstan consists of 3 provinces. You can see from the map below. So this is Jalabad, Osh, and Batken provinces, 3 provinces. So I should say that almost half of the population of Kyrgyzstan live in these 3 provinces in the southern Kyrgyzstan. Mainly they concentrated in the Fergana Valley. So maybe you know. So this Fergana Valley. And like 70% of labor migrants in Russia, they are from these 3 provinces of Kyrgyzstan. When we look at the challenges, difficulties in the rural areas, so we can see that there are several challenges, like as climate-related, social economic challenges. For example, in one of the villages of this Bazar-Korgon district, we found out this climate impacted challenges, like as you can see drought or shortage of the irrigation water, mud flows, and also several social and economic challenges like as unemployment, poverty, difficulties with repaying of bank credits or loans because of the high interests, and also conflicts over the water or machinery in the villages, and several other challenges. All these challenges also and difficulties in the households in the rural areas lead people to undertake coping and adaptation strategies like as international labor migration. From this figure, you can see the destination of migrants from one of the rural municipalities in the southern Kyrgyzstan. And the main destination for migrants is Moscow, as you can see from here, and also several cities in Russia, like as Krasnoyarsk, Yekaterinburg, St. Petersburg. And I should say that the geography of the labor migration is becoming broad, and migrants went not only to the central part of the Russia, but also to Ural Federal District, to Siberia or Far East Federal Districts. Also it depends on the availability of job, networks, and support from their networks. So this figure also illustrates the linkage between two countries and between two locations within the two countries, like as from Arstambov village and to the cities of Russia. This diagram shows that the majority of labor migrants, they engaged in construction, trade, service, and industry sectors of the place of destination, for example, particularly in Russia. And the survey conducted in Moscow in 2016 showed that the majority of interviewed migrants, they worked in a service sector, like as restaurant, cafes, and also in the trade sector of the Moscow city. The main positive impact of the international labor migration is remittances, of course, and from this graphic you can see that the amount of the remittances increased except several crisis periods. For example, you can see the crisis period between 2008 and 2009 when the remittances decreased, and the recent crisis period between 2014 and 15 when the remittances sharply decreased. However, in 2017, the amount of remittances increased again. So, as I mentioned, the main positive economic impact is remittances, and from this diagram, we can see that the international remittances play an important role and is a main income source for the migrants' households. So the other main source of income comes from the agricultural activities in the rural areas, and of course the state support like salary, pensions. But you can see that the international remittances play an important role as a source of income. When we look at the spending patterns of remittances, a large number of migrants' households spend remittances for their everyday expenses, for real estate, for purchasing cars and renovation their houses, for livestock, for paying debts and credits, and also for the traditional events. However, unfortunately, the investment of remittances to the human capital, like as education or, for example, medical treatment, is still low in Kyrgyzstan. Livestock considered as one of the main important capital that can be sold or transferred into the cash when it's needed. That's why many households spend their remittances to the purchasing of livestock. Investment of remittances into the business is an important strategy because it brings additional source of income to the household and help to become more resilient. And also, this helps not only to improve the household's well-being, but also to develop the social infrastructure of the rural area. As I mentioned, since the majority of labor migrants from Kyrgyzstan work in Russia and also in Kazakhstan, the integration of the Kyrgyzstan to the Eurasian Economic Union brought many changes to the international migration. And it should be mentioned that the majority of labor migrants, they supported the integration to the Eurasian Economic Union, especially those migrants who didn't have their permit documents in order. So because it was very good opportunity for them to legalize their stay and work in Russia. So Kyrgyzstan joined the Eurasian Economic Union in 2015. As maybe many of you know that 5 former republics of the five republics of the former Soviet Union, like as Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, formed the Eurasian Economic Union. I should mention also about that European Union served as a model of interregional integration for the Eurasian Economic Union, and the main aim of the Eurasian Economic Union is to shape the form for the freedom of movement of peoples, goods, services, and the capital. Integration to the Eurasian Economic Union brought several changes, positive and negative impacts. And it's also impacted heavily on the dynamics of the migration. So according to statistics, the number of migrants increased after the joining to the, from Kyrgyzstan, after the joining of Kyrgyzstan to Eurasian Economic Union. Among the positive impacts, the interviewed migrants in Moscow mentioned the simplification in getting of registration and getting a job without permission documents, because before the migrants have to obtain permission documents or patent to get job in Russia. Simplification in getting medical insurance, reduction of problem with police, saving money because they will not pay anymore for the permit documents, or abolition of special exam to enter to the Russian Federation, and also opportunity to get a better job after the integration process. Migrants in Moscow also highlighted several negative impacts. For example, they mentioned that the increase in number of migrants negatively impacted on the getting a job, because the wages reduced and it was difficult to get a job. And they also mentioned that they intensified the checking from the police side and the increase of deportation, and also to falling into the blacklist and losing the main source of income. Some employers complaints about the mentioned that the complaint about that priority is given to Russian citizens, for example, and that some employers, they don't want to sign a contract with the labor migrants. However, integration to the Eurasian Economic Union contributed to the transnational practices of migrants. So migrants commute repeatedly between two countries, and this contributes and play an important role in integration in international interregional linkages. For example, you can see that this is linkage between Kyrgyzstan and Russia, between Jalalabad city and Moscow, or Arstambov rural area to Moscow. And I should mention several aspects here. For example, people from Kyrgyzstan move to Russia, and there is exchange of information, skills. For example, migrants bring new skills to Kyrgyzstan or to rural area. For example, they are renovating their houses according to their new skills, or they learn how to process the dairy products, different, for example, types of cheese when they work at the factory in Moscow, for example. So some migrants, when they are returning back, they open own business in processing the dairy products in Kyrgyzstan, for example, or some people working in restaurants, for example, Japanese restaurants or like as Italian restaurants in Moscow, they learn many things and they bring these skills to Kyrgyzstan and opening like as new cafes and restaurants in Kyrgyzstan. When we're telling about them, for example, other side to Russia or Moscow, labor migrants from the Kyrgyzstan is a cheap labor source for the Russia. And as you know, the economy of Russia, they needed more labor sources. And also, for example, some migrants from Kyrgyzstan, they opened Kyrgyz cafes in Moscow, for example, so they bring their Kyrgyz cuisine, or I can say also Central Asian cuisine to Russia. So there is a linkage and exchange of information skills between these locations. Coming to the conclusion, I would like to say that international labor migration brings additional source of income which inhibit the social tension and poverty in Kyrgyzstan. And the most important thing also that mobility of people and the development of social networks across the borders contribute to the movement of financial capital, information, skills, symbols, and etc. And this is very important factor. A new political identity, I mean here that some Kyrgyz citizens, they obtain Russian citizenship, and the close ties of these people to the place of their origin and to place of destination contribute to emergence of transnational practices. And freedom of movement of people within the EU countries, improvement in the legalization of the migrants, they contribute to the interregional linkage, so between these two countries and the several places within this country. And today the seasonal, circular, transnational migration strategies has become one of the main strategies in response to the limited livelihoods in Kyrgyzstan and especially in the rural areas of Kyrgyzstan. So thank you for your attention. So please, if you have questions, comments. So, yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Jens Roll. I'm from Germany, and I was curious about I was interested when you mentioned that Kyrgyzstan distributes a lot of remittances to the population, especially in the region you were talking about. And I'm curious, could you briefly explain again why the remittances have been increasing, especially throughout the past years, and where is the main source of these remittances are for the government, and if it's creating any financial problems for the government to financially support increasing remittances for that region?
Okay, thank you for your question. So I can show that slide. Second. You mean this one, yeah? Why increase them? You can see from this diagram that the amount of remittances started to increase from the 2000s, beginning of the 2000s, yeah? And because mainly the international labor migration, the number of migrants started to increase from the beginning of 2000s and towards. And this is related to the number of migrants, first of all, because the number of migrants increased and increased the remittances. I mentioned here only during the several economic crises they decreased. Because of this large number, I mentioned that 700,000 of migrants nowadays work abroad. So that's why this is related to the number of migrants, and also migrants who are working for a long time, for example, in Russian Federation, they get better jobs, better salaries, and they able to send more money to their families left behind in the rural areas. And I forgot to mention that Kyrgyzstan, one of the world's second country where the economy is very dependent on the remittances. The percentage of remittances in GDP in Kyrgyzstan reached 33%. So the first country is Tajikistan, where the share of remittances like 36%. And for me, it's not really clear your point about the state, the role of state, because of the low salaries, low pensions, low allowances in Kyrgyzstan. People migrate to help or to support their families. So that's why they're sending remittances. Yeah. Okay, so if no questions, then I will give floor to the next presenter. Thank you.